Welcome back, Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut. As we continue our series on Rav Chaim Kanievsky's Seforim, and this one is going to be a bit different in the sense that I think we've come to one of Rav Chaim's Seforim that's going to take quite a few podcast episodes to really go through well. And that's the Sefer Derech Emunah. And I mentioned in the past that Rav Chaim has on his kaver that he's called the Baal Derech Emunah. I don't know the history for that, but that's what it says on his kaver. So I would assume that was a sefer that was especially chaviv in his eyes. It was certainly, well, Eliezer will tell us what it is. It's basically a full-fledged Mishnah Brura, Bir Halacha, Shara Tziyun style sefer on the Rambam Hilchos Rayim. And that's what we want to talk about today. And it's interesting because Mishnayos, the Mishnah Yomi, are learning, going through the Masechtas and Masechtas Zerayim. So it's very interesting for those that are learning Mishnayos as well. And we're looking forward to this. We're going to start now with just an introduction to Derech Emunah, which Rabbi Brud has already told me is going to be at least 2 parts. We're going to go through, like we've done in the past when we discussed the Seforim on the Masechtas, we've gone through a history of how the Limud was learned through the generations, when the Rishonim were written, how they developed, and the Achronim. So that will focus on in this first part, the Rishonim and Achronim through the 1880s. And then the next part will be from the 1880s and on through the 1900s until we get to Derech Emunah, which was published in the early 1980s. So with that Hakdama, Rabbi Eliezer, how are you today? And before you start, I just want to read, as has become our minhag. I don't make this a minhag because if no one sends emails, I'm going to be in trouble. But we got some nice messages, and I want to read a couple of them before we begin. I know Rabbi Brud is very humble, so please bear with us. So somebody writes, an old friend of yours. He says he's an old chaver of yours from Yeshiva Shar HaTorah. He says, it's good to hear from you. Again, after all these years, he says, even then, you were the safer sage. So I'm really enjoying the Shiurim on Reb Chaim's Seforim. I listened to 6 already. He says he stumbled upon them visiting Oldaf. Your yeda, the word you like to use, your yeda, is truly amazing. I proudly tell people I know you from Yeshiva Shar HaTorah. Try to make Musar part of my learning on my commute to work. I feel these qualify. He says he feels these qualify as Musar learning. Okay, Musar Shmuzin as well. They bring us closer to the ways of the Gedolei Yisrael. So, thank you for that. Very interesting one. He says, I love Yeshurim on Oldaf. He says, I just left the business world to go back to Kollel. Wow. Maybe on all of us, we should have the opportunity to go back to Kollel. And he says he's looking forward to anything that you have. He's learning Yavamis now. And any content or material you know about Yavamis, please send him. He says, please keep your fascinating shiurim coming. He says, I meet people and start schmoozing and mention your shiurim. I would think I'm telling them something they don't know about. Some of them, even Hasidic Yidden, that I didn't think have access. Right away, they say, I love them. Fascinating. And one more, somebody else writes, he says, I love every word you say. He says, I gained so much from your lectures. He even collects your interesting sources in OneNote, so he could look them up and file everything away. Thank you again for your lectures and responses. So everything that's said here, I second, and thank you very, very much. I'm sure there's a lot of preparation that goes into any one of these shiurim. And again, anybody who wants to sponsor any of the episodes, please reach out to myself, shweidm@ou.org. And again, any questions, comments, suggestions, send either myself or eliezer.brut@gmail.com. With that introduction, okay, so jump right in. Tell us about Zerayim. Zerayim is a seder in the Shishas of the Mishnah, which is not learnt as much as, by far, as much as the other Starim. It doesn't even have Shas Bavli. So take us back to the beginning.
Okay, so I feel that in order to fully appreciate on some level the Derech Emunah of Reb Chaim, we have to move back to zooming out to Seder Zerayim Bechlal. And with this, we'll have a better understanding what makes his work so unique, so special. Basically like this. Zerayim was not halacha l'maisa. So that was a reason that some suggested that it wasn't learned so much over the years, and that's why there's no Bavli on Zram. But if that's the case, why is there Bavli on Kachim? So obviously it's not a clear. We don't have a clear answer why there's Bavli on certain parts, Dafki Rishalmi on other parts. But bottom line is, this is discussed at great length by Professor Yaakov Zussman in his doctorate. But we don't have a good answer why it is what it is. There's a lot of issues relating to the Talmud as we have it is mysterious. But what we do know is we have Yerushalmi on Zron and Tosefta on Zron besides for the Mishnayos. So we have very early Chiburim to help us learn, even though we don't have the Bavli. Fast forward to the times of the Rishonim. So already there was a Rishon Reb Yitzchak Malki Tzedek, who it seems from what we know is active in the years 10. He's born in 1090 approximately, dies approximately 1160, and he wrote a massive chibur on Zram. Now this work was only first printed in the 1880s when Shas Vilna was trying to print out the Mishnayos and when they were printing out the Talmud Bavli with all different things. So I've mentioned in the past that they went to look for new manuscripts, new materials. This is how they added Rabbeinu Chananel, which eventually we'll discuss more, and other materials. So one of the things is they added Uri Malki Tzedek on the side. So this helped. We now had an early Rishon on Zram, because as I said, there's not, as I'm going to document shortly, there's not so many Rishonim on Zram. Maisa 1975, Mechon Talmud Israeli prints a much more expanded version of the Uri Malki Tzedek and on Zram, and one could get it today. And even though it's unfound in Gemara, on the side of the Gemara, but the Gemara it's incomplete. And this manuscript, these are based on more manuscripts, has much more text. Okay, we know besides for the Uri Malki Tzedek, a little later is the Rambam. Everyone knows the Rambam. First of all, Perish Mishnayos. He has a Perish Mishnayos running through Zram, and the Yad HaChazaka has tons of material. He has all the halachas of Zram, and this is actually what we're going to get to eventually. Chaim Kanievsky writes his Perish choosing the Rambam, and other people do the same. The Rambam dies in 1204, and literally in around those years, we have another Rishon from the Balei HaTosfos, one of the greatest Talmidim of the Riyazakin, the Rash Meshantz. And the Rash Meshantz, besides for writing Tosfos and Chiburim on Tosfos on Shas, writes a massive work on Zram, the Rash Meshantz on Zram, and it's printed already in the early printings of the Shas in 1523 from Bamberg, and pretty much eventually it stays on the side of the Gemara. If you buy a Talmud Bavli, so when you get up to Zram, you'll see on the side you have your Rash Meshantz. When is he nifter? He's nifter in 1214. We know this based on a document that was discovered in recent years. Professor Tashma printed it, and we know exactly when he died, which is 1214. Where does he die? In Eretz Yisrael. Some people even tie that the reason why this Rishon wrote an extensive chibur on Zram was because he knew he was going to Eretz Yisrael. And at that time, it seems there's even a legend brought down in certain Seforim, Shevim Yehuda. Actually, I'm not sure it's Shevim Yehuda or Shashal Sakabala brings down that 300 Rabbanim went to Eretz Yisrael in those years. One of them, we don't know if 300 actually went or what the levels of all 300, but we definitely do know that the Rash Meshantz ends up in Eretz Yisrael, and he dies there in 1214. All this has been discussed at length in a beautiful article from Professor Ephraim Karnifogel. Now, the Rash Meshantz was also into Tyrus. We have his Perish on Tyrus, and even as of very recent, the past few years, discoveries of more pieces of his and oils have been found, and it came out as a work. Not only is the Rash Meshantz a Rishon that made it to Eretz Yisrael and writes a chibur relating to Zram, we have at the same time the Sefer Haterumot, also one of the great also a Balei HaTosfos from the Balei HaTosfos, writes a halachic work, Sefer Haterumot, and it's based on the same document that I quoted earlier from Tashma. We know that he dies in Eretz Yisrael in 1211. So in his Sefer Haterumot, he has a section called Hilchos Eretz Yisrael, and it also has in it Hilchos Eretz Yisrael. It would seem that a motive behind writing it was because it was going to be actually that he was going to Eretz Yisrael, and he wanted to be prepared about Eretz Yisrael. Anyway, the Sefer Haterumot has been discussed a lot recently in a beautiful book for Ater Zakanim from Professor Simcha Emanuel, and a Talmud of his, Rabbi Yoel Freeman, put out a lot of work on the Sefer Haterumot, and he reprinted the parts of the Hilchos Eretz Yisrael based on all the manuscripts, and one could see the significance of it. But what's important is here we have Rishonim that actually came to Eretz Yisrael, and they lived there. We're not sure how many years, and they had some type of we have it till today, some type of chibur on Eretz Yisrael from the Sefer Haterumot, and Rash Meshantz we have a mamish be'iyon de Kaftar Vapherach on Mishnah Yisrael. Okay, the story continues with the Sefer Kaftar Vapherach. Now the Sefer Kaftar Vapherach, based on dates inside the book, we could date it. It seems that it was finished in 1322. Now this Sefer is a game changer for areas of Eretz Yisrael. Basically, it's 60 chapters, which has in it everything and anything that's related to Eretz Yisrael. Halachic, plant, but not only halachic, geography, plants. He basically toured most of Eretz Yisrael. It seems he was Isaac in the Gvulas of Eretz Yisrael, the Kvarim of Eretz Yisrael, and also Hilchos Ram Be'iyon. He had an incredible library. We have no idea how he had so many Seforim. It's a mystery, and it's a beyond impressive work. These 60 chapters. The Gedolei HaPoskim, in such as the Beis Yosef, the Mabit, especially the Radbaz, they have it. The Radbaz brings it down. They had it, and the Radbaz brings it down many times. The Ramah also quotes it sometimes, but Lamaisa, be that as it may, it was still considered rare. It's first printed in 1548, and it's not even clear who exactly. We know a little bit who is Rabbeim, more possibly, but it's still it's a the work is a mystery. All we do know is that he literally was in every part of Israel, and he lived there, and we have information about Eretz Yisrael at that time, which is also very rare. It's printed in 1548, and then it takes a bunch of years till 1851 is when it's next printed again, and then in 1897, and then in the 1900s it's been printed a few times, sometimes with extensive beer. One of those biurim, one beer that was written on it was from the great Rabbi Yochanan Fishel Perlin, an incredible beer, similar to his famous beer on the Rasag of Reb Sadigai. Sadly, he did complete the work, but only a small percentage survived, and that percentage is quite a few hundred pages. So it's a shame. It seems that what happened was after he was nifter, was sent back to Europe, and this was in the beginning of World War II, and it got lost. It's a mystery and a very sad mystery. But the actual sefer was printed by Meister of Cook, and what we do have is incredible, and it's only on a few prakim of the Kaftar Vapherach. Anyway, fast forward many years later, and the Mechon, which I guess for practical purposes headed by Rafati, puts out the three massive volumes, beautiful volumes that are available on Hebrew books today, based on the manuscripts, with a beer, with a bunch of chapters in the back explaining all different things, and it could be that we will get to some aspects in the Kaftar Vapherach dealing with Chaim in other episodes relating to the Derech Emunah. But just as kedai to mention it now, and besides for this this very sophisticated edition from Rabbi Frati's Kailul, there was also even recently a kenes where they had a bunch of lectures from all different people fascinated about this Kaftar Vapherach, and it was printed as a book also. Okay, I can the Rishonim what there is on Zron, but pretty much besides for this, there's not too much. There's no ritvas, what we used to ritva, Rajgaram, Bands, and many others from. There's not really too much out there. Okay, so the question is, so when did it become a topic? So I thought that in the times of the Beis Yosef, when there was a lot of Yidden, and Beis Yosef is one of them, living in Tzvas, and there was a big Jewish community there, we know a lot about this Jewish community, that then it will become a big topic, and there will be some chiburim already then written about mitzvahs atlois ba'aretz. Anyway, there are some tshuvas written at the time. Some of them you can see in Meir Ben Yo's work on the Beis Yosef called Yosef Bechiri. Some of them relating to Shemitah from Boaz Hutter in his book, his excellent work on Shemitah. But pretty much, there's not a work as far as maybe a manuscript, but I don't think there is a work that specifically deals with mitzvahs atlois ba'aretz. And it's strange. However, in the times of the Beis Yosef, in Tzfas, there was a Yid, also from the Gerish Svarad, the Rash Sirliov, and he wrote a massive work on Yerushalmi Zron. And he's the subject of a whole doctorate, and Betzal Dablitsky wrote in a recent issue of Minhag Nazim from Mechon Ahavat Shalom, made a discovery of some more materials of his. He also wrote a very nice introduction about the Rash Sirliov. Anyway, he wrote intense the Ian Dika Pirish on most Yerushalmi Zron. He's even Isaac and Gersais, which they also deal with. And it's in the times of the Beis Yosef, and Beis Yosef saw it. It seems he used it sometimes. And Shimon Gebetzis, which is also contemporary, also used it sometimes. Okay. But sadly, this massive work was not printed. This massive Ksav Yad seems to have gone to the hands of the Chida at one point, and some others. They trace it. They know some of the stops where this manuscript went. And in 1875, the famous Marcus Lehman, who to us is famous for writing a bunch of novels, but he was also a Chashav Rav who wrote Seforim, prints from manuscript the Marash Sirliov on Brachas. This is in 1875. But Zerayim, the rest of Zerayim, is not printed. And we'll get to when it gets printed, because it only gets printed starting in the 1930s. Okay, but we'll return to that soon. Anyway, so here we're bringing it up to the Tkuf of the Beis Yosef and people living in Eretz Yisrael, in Tzfas, and we don't see them writing or publishing. Maybe they wrote, but we don't have complete works of Mitzvahs at place of Baritz. Okay. Anyway, looking around, I see in 1735, one of the Shas's that was published at the time, I think it was in a Shas, they printed it as a separate volume, but it could be it was related to a Shas. They found in the library of David Oppenheim, the Rush also had some type of parish on Zerayim. It seems to be a kitzer of the Rash Meshantz, and it was printed in 1735. Today it's found, that eventually was printed on the side in the Vilna Gemaras, and they have more manuscripts, and some parts of it was printed. Okay. But the question remains, this is getting us into the 1730s. Is there any point that all of a sudden Zerayim becomes a big thing? I would have thought in the times of the Beis Yosef, but from what I see, and if someone could point me to many sources, I would love to see them. I can't, this is all new to me. I will confess, I'm learning this for the first time as I'm going through these topics with Chaim Kanievsky. So I think that it starts with the Vilna Gaon. My reasons is as follows. Basically, the Vilna Gaon was one of the people that we know where he goes full-fledged to learn Kol Terakula, and what it means Kol Terakula means from beginning to end, not just Talmud Bavli, it means Midrash Chazal, Yerushalmi, Tosefta. We have shiurim or notes of the Gra on Gans Mishnayis Ram. It's found in the Mishnayis, standard Mishnayis Yachan Abayis, Mishnayis Elio, and there's other nuschais of it. And these were, it seems to be shiurim of that the Vilna Gaon gave to. Now, how many Talmidim he really did have, or what it is, if he wrote it, a Talmud wrote it, these are discussions beyond the scope, but we have the Vilna Gaon going through Zerayim. We have on Yerushalmi, we have his notes on Yerushalmi, and we even have today incredible discoveries in private collection, the Yerushalmi with the Hagayis of the Gra, and this has been the subject of recent work from Yedidya Frankel and Zalman Koren. They've published their works in various journals, such as Yeshurin and academic journals also. And they put out only on Yerushalmi Bikurim, where they show through unbelievable work the significance of every tag shabbat tag of a line, what the Gra means. It's incredible to see what they're dirish in it, showing after one has a Havana of the Sugya very clear in the Yerushalmi, if they're related Gemaras and whatever, all the materials, to see what the Gra is doing from like 4 little dashes. It's mind-boggling. He's given many shiurim about this also, and he only, due to lack of funds, he's only put out Yerushalmi Bikurim. And then we have the Tosefta. We have the Gra's Haaretz and Tosefta. Also, Chibur, not really. Now, there were people such as the Chazei David did write about Zerayim, but again, it didn't have such widespread things. So I'm claiming is that the Vilna Gaon, if I want to try to pinpoint a period of time or something that there's Zerayim that Zerayim gets somewhere. Now, I'm not claiming that the Vilna Gaon had a massive yeshiva. I'm not claiming that this has to relate to that he has Talmidim going to Eretz Yisrael, tons of Talmidim. He did have some Talmidim, we'll get to shortly, that are in Eretz Yisrael, and they're also learning Hilchos Kliyos Ba'aretz. And I'm not linking this to what today very famous about if the Gra and Askalta de Geula and all these types of topics, which is its own rabbit hole, which I will not go down to for the sake of Rachmanis for everyone, based on new evidence that's been printed in the past few years. But the point is that the Vilna Gaon is and what we have his notes, his Chiburim Eyam Mishnayis, Yerushalmi, and Tosefta. Okay. So now, but the question is, when does it become halachidik? The whole time I'm asking, when does it become a halachidik? If I want to know, I'm about to make Aliyah. I'm living in 1805. I'm one of the few people that wants to make Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, and I need to know basic halachas mitzvahs. What could I look at? What could I use to get to know the basics when I move to Eretz Yisrael? So the interesting thing is, someone that definitely is relating on some level to the Vilna Gaon, and I will definitely not go into why and what, because that is its own series of many. There will be many lectures, but the Chaya Adam, Rav Ram Danzig, writes a chibur in 1812 called Sharei Tzedek. And he publishes it in 1812. And at first, let's read the Shar, which was written by him, where he discusses what he's going to do. It says, Shar Aleph is about mitzvahs haaretz. What I'm going to discuss, Kol ha-mitzvahs ha-kliyos ba'aretz, v'noyim b'zman hazeh, Trumas Meisers Demai. Okay. Then he goes on. He says, I have a section about Arla, Klaim, Chadash, Matnas Guna, and areas that are all over Shas and Shulchan Aruch. Okay. Then he goes on. What's it based on? He says, what's the tayelis of my chibur? The tayelis of my chibur is one could become a baki and say there's Ram halacha le'maisa bizman katzer mai in a short period of time. What's it based on? He says the psukim of the Rambam and the Noisei Kelim. Then certain times I don't have pshat. And he says, I'm using also the Yerushalmi and Tosefta, which we already know that they have on Zra. Then he goes, there's certain materials that the Rambam doesn't bring down for whatever reason, but where is it? It's in the Rash, which we also discussed where it comes from. The Tosefta, and I'll use a lot. So here we see the fact that he's throwing Yerushalmi Tosefta, we see some Gra-like influence. Anyway, he says, this is my chibur that I'm publishing. And he publishes it in 1812. In the Hagdama of the Sefer, he tells us a fascinating piece of information adding to this. He says, why am I doing this? So that one is that even people not making Aliyah, should know the Hilchos Eretz Yisrael. Just like if you use my Chaya Adam, you could learn, or if you're a day, you could learn the Dinim B'Kitzur. Okay. Then he says, interesting, he says, in 2 or 3 weeks, you could be a Baki B'chol Seder Zerayim Halach L'Maisa, and I'll be a Mazakir Rabbim. Okay. Then he says another reason why he's writing this, which links to the tragedy that happened, which he records at the end of his Chaya Adam, where family members of his were killed, and he made at that time he made a promise that if he's Zeich, he's going to go make Aliyah to Yerushalayim. So now he needs to know the halachas if he's going to go there. He says like this. He says that maybe I'll be Zeich to go to Yisrael, just like the people, Reb Sadia, Reb Chaim, Reb Hirsch, were able to go. Who are these people? These are Gra Talmidim. Okay, we're not going to get into the arichas who they are. This Reb Chaim is a very good friend of his. Reb Sadia is the author of the Meiser Rav, and Reb Hirsch. Now, then he says, important sentences over here. Someone's going to go to the Chatzar of the Melech. He doesn't know the Minhagim. Someone wants to live there. Allah never me bikish zois miyadchem Ramus Chatzar. Lakati likol hadinim hashayich lezev. Karati Sharei Tzedek al Shem Yerushalayim hanikut Tzedek. That's why I am writing this one. So he's hoping that he's also going to get there, and he's hoping he's going to get to Eretz Yisrael, and these are some of the reasons behind it. Reb Chaim Kanievsky Agav quotes this Sefer extensively, quotes this point that I said, this last point, that if you're going to live in Eretz Yisrael and you're not going to know the thing, and you're living in the palace of the king, you're not going to know the proper halachas. Reb Chaim Kanievsky also quotes that in his Akdama to Derech. Okay. Now, but then there's another very significant addition to Hilchos Eretz Yisrael, and that is from another person that had to do with the Gra, although he actually not as well known. He had much less to do with the Gra than the Chaya Adam. He was a Talmud of the Gra of Seif Yamav, Mamish, the last few months of the last year of his life. Rabbi Scroll Shklaver, famous Goyin Olam, who ends up moving to Eretz Yisrael, being the head of the community in Eretz Yisrael. And one of the works that he writes is Paes Hashulchan. It's simply an incredible work. Mamish, whatever he printed, is just amazing. He's living in Eretz Yisrael, he's moving to Eretz Yisrael, and he lives in Eretz Yisrael, so obviously it's Negei Yoim Yoim, what to do. So here also, in the Hagdama, he talks about, in his Shar of the first edition, which is printed in the 1830s, he says it's based on, he's printing Pilchas Peya, Lekka, Shikha, Maiserani, Dmai, Hilchas Shvius. Now, he doesn't get to the rest. It seems that he was going to print a volume 2, but it seems either he didn't write it or was lost. I'm not sure. But The inside, the text is the Rambam, and then he collects a lot of material from the Rashi, Taisus, Bahag, Ramban, Ravid, and then he says, where else do I use Taisefta and Yerushalmi? Because there's a lot of materials and that one could get from these sources, especially the Girsais of the Yerushalmi. And he says, and this he emphasized already in a shar, from Mimaron Hagoyin HaMiti, the Rebel Yechasim Mivilna. The Kitzer, he's making a Shulchan Aruch, he says, with a Bir Aruch to explain the sugya called Paes Yisrael. And this is what he ends up publishing, and it's been published a few times. Extensive arichos and the sugyas, the Bavlis, the Yerushalmis, anything related possibly somehow to the sugyas in hand, he's got it in his Sefer. Now, interestingly enough, the Sefer has a beautiful Hagdama where he talks a lot about the Vilna Gaon, and that's why it's a very famous Hagdama that's been quoted all the time in all the different biographies about the Vilna Gaon. He has all different Messiahs that he had, stuff that he himself saw. But relating to this Sefer, he throws in is the Chaya Adam. So he says that the Chaya Adam wrote a Sefer called Sharet Tzedek, but he says Lo Chidish Biyurim V'Lo Yoga B'Shitas Yerushalmi V'Shitas Rabbeinu Hagoyin Klal. So he has he sort of has a taina on him that it's not enough Gra. He's not focusing enough on the Gra, and if you look in the Gra, especially in Zerayim, it's unbelievable what's going on here. And he also brings from the Shnei Salio Mishnayos that we said on Zerayim that Chaim Volozhiner says it's unbelievable. So the Kitzer says that I'm using those materials of the Vilna Gaon. He's Agoyis on Yerushalmi, Tosef, everything, and that is this work on Hilchos Eretz Yisrael. So now, if we look and we stop over here, we're holding in the 1830s. We now have finally two works, but there's two chesroinus. The Chaya Adam is very bekitzer, and the Paes Hashulchan is only half. So we're still stuck in the 1830s without a complete work of mitzvahs hatluyos ba'aretz. Okay, so this is, I would say, the first part of what gets us to Limud Zerayim, it gets us to the 1830s, and the story continues pretty much. There's not too much happening in Zerayim in this century.
Excellent. Wow. Eliezer, you just spoke for almost a half an hour without me interrupting you. Excellent. So let's wrap up this part over here, and we're going to come back. We're going to come back with part two. We're already holding deep into the 1800s, and as you just mentioned, there isn't a go-to handbook, so to speak, for somebody to learn and know Hilchos Zerayim. So stay tuned, come back, and there's a lot more interesting information coming up. Thank you.